as Kusasara has been saying, we've been exploring the parables from the White Lotus Sutra. And these come from a period of Buddhism called the Mahayana, which is more concerned with communicating the spirit rather than the letters of the Buddhist teachings. And in the sutra we have we're kind of in the realm of myth, of story, of image, and these images, these stories, these myths, they point to more of an experiential knowing. So they can kind of access deeper parts of us. They can access more unconscious parts of us. And tonight, so some of these have been more like parables and stories. And so if you were looking forward to a story, you might be a little bit disappointed tonight, because today this is probably a bit more of an image, actually. Not very much happens. But basically, so this is the parable of the raincloud. And here the Buddha compares himself to a giant rain cloud that spreads over all of the land, and then it rains. It rains on all the different plants, and then all the plants spring up. They come to life, and they spring up in accordance with their own nature. So this is all that happens basically in the story. But it's a very rich and it's a very beautiful image, which speaks in quite a profound way actually about growth. So I'm going to share a few reflections on this image with you tonight. So first of all, I think we have to kind of contextualize this a little bit, because if we think about rain in England and in Northern Europe, it doesn't quite kind of have that sense of being very welcome always. So we have to kind of imagine. So this sutra, the backdrop is northern India, and we kind of have to imagine ourselves at the end of one of their kind of hot, dry seasons. So I did a little bit of research on this in preparation for the talk. So the hot, dry season can be kind of between 3 and 4 months, and it can be over 40 degrees. And and everything just gets progressively more and more kind of arid. So you can imagine maybe like the hottest place that you've ever been, if you've ever been to a desert landscape or something like that. And then kind of over time, like all the water starts to dry up. Me and Akasha Vidya, we were in the mountains in Spain, getting ordained earlier this year, and it got very hot at some point, and you could just see like all of the wherever there was a river or a pond, like slowly just started to dry up, and you just see these kind of cracks in the earth, and the air is very dry and hot, feels hot to the nostrils and to the lungs, and all the plants start to kind of wither. So you'd sort of imagine a long period of this. And then you have the coming of the monsoon, and you have this giant sort of rain cloud that just rains over all of life. And just imagining kind of the relief of that. Like it's almost like the land is thirsty. The land is kind of longing for that rain. And there's a sense of relief, there's a sense of refreshment, a sense of cooling, a sense of like kind of like if you're drinking a glass of cold lemonade on a really hot day, like that's kind of what the image is trying to get at. So we can think about the rain as the Dharma, and we can think about sort of how was it for us the first time that we came into contact with the Dharma. Did we have an experience of it feeling a bit like a relief, like water on a hot day? I actually came into contact with the Dharma for the first time on this retreat. I think it was 11 years ago. I kind of went in blindly, actually. I'm sure most of you are more sensible, and you've probably been to a Buddhist center and done things before, but I just went in blind. I got invited by a friend. And I wasn't particularly like unhappy in my life at the time, but I was definitely a seeker, and I was definitely driven by this kind of modern myth that we kind of create our own happiness. That happiness comes from kind of getting everything right, getting all the conditions right, like finding the right job, finding the right partner, finding the right place to live, and so I was very much sort of in that, and that puts a lot of pressure on us, doesn't it? When we sort of think that we have to get everything right, and if we're unhappy, and if life doesn't work, it's because we've somehow gotten it wrong. So it's such a relief actually to hear dukkha, to hear sort of the first noble truth of dukkha, that life is unsatisfactory, that just being acknowledged. And I think some people misunderstand this a bit to mean that life is suffering. It isn't quite that. It's kind of just that we whatever satisfaction we find through kind of orchestrating life, trying to make things go our way, will run out, and it will leave us kind of hankering after more. And that. Yeah, in a certain way, like that, not getting what we want, things not going away, that's kind of part and parcel of life. And that isn't our individual problem. It's not our fault. It's a collective problem that's rooted in the mind. It's a collective conditioning that we have as human beings. And the solution is also in the mind. So in hearing this for the first time, it was definitely a relief, and I think over time really reduced a lot of the existential angst that I felt, and the sort of heavy weight of responsibility of like having to kind of get everything right. So yeah, that's probably my experience of that rain coming as a relief. And then, so we have the Buddha, the rain cloud, and the Dharma, which rains down, pours down. And then we have all the plants. And this is sort of what happens. I don't know if anyone has been in the monsoon. I'm talking about this as if I have been. I haven't, but this is also from my research. So all of the life just kind of springs up because it just rains like buckets and buckets of rain for days and days and days, and sort of you just see these kind of plants coming to life. And I think this is the most beautiful part of this image, actually. They all spring up differently in their own unique way, in accordance with their own nature. So a rosebud will turn into a rose, and a palm tree will grow into a bigger palm tree. So we'll, and this is kind of, so the plants, that's an image for us as human beings. So all of us, when we come into contact with the Dharma, we'll grow if we're receptive to it, but we'll grow in our own particular way. And I think, I had certainly for me, like when I first came along, I certainly had an idea of what it was to be a Buddhist, what it looked like. And I didn't think I really fitted that shape very well. So sort of the image that I had was of someone quite kind of introverted who would sort of spend lots of time in their room, like looking at the sky. Really deep meditator, lots of visions. They definitely wore a fleece as well. Now everyone wears fleeces though. So, but anyway, so I had this idea of what a Buddhist kind of looked like, and then quite quickly, as you get involved in the Sangha, and maybe even on this retreat, you have a sense of actually how different everyone is. And the relief is we're not all trying to be the same, and we're trying to become more and more ourselves. We're trying to grow in accordance with our own nature. And part of walking the Buddhist path is kind of allowing ourselves and daring to become our most authentic selves. And this is what Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of this movement, called a true individual. So a true individual is somebody who is aware of themselves, somebody who is emotionally integrated. So they know themselves, they know their emotional landscape, and they kind of, they can manage that. They're ethically responsible. And someone who has developed a genuine sense of inner freedom, right, rather than someone who's trying to kind of just fit into a group or fit into society. So this is what we're trying to become. We want to sort of grow into a true individual. And the vision for the Sangha is an association of true individuals. So that all of us come together. We're kind of nourished by the same Dharma, by the same teachings. But ultimately, we're not trying to kind of be a group. We're trying to be true individuals where everyone feels that they can be themselves. And and when the Dharma touches us, we'll grow in ways that perhaps we hadn't known or we hadn't imagined before. And so, I think we need to know. There's a certain level of needing to know what type of plant we are. There's a certain level of needing to know what conditions we need to thrive. And as we start practicing, we, in the meditation practices, we're getting to know our minds. We're becoming familiar with the patterns of our minds. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you know someone who's very good at caring for house plants. It's not really me, unfortunately, but I lived with someone, a woman called Muditeshwari, who was very good at caring for houseplants, and she would kind of get to know each plant and know exactly the amount of light that they would need, where to position them, how much water they would need, and that actually changes depending on whether it's summer or winter, and you can't just automatically be like, hey, you water them once a week and that's it, and you water them that much. It's a very receptive thing of actually getting to know the plant, and we have to be a little bit like this with our own minds, and particularly in meditation, we have to get to know our own minds, and we have to get to know what conditions help our minds to thrive, and how to work with our minds, how to best work with our minds. But beyond this, I mean, we actually we can get to know ourselves, and this path will help us to do that. But there's also a mystery. We can't really fully know our own nature, because what Buddhism is saying is that we all, our deepest potential is to get enlightened. Our highest potential is to get enlightened, and we all have that seed, that potentiality within us, and we really don't know how we will grow if we develop spiritually. We might have a sense of that, but ultimately, there's only so much that we can do to kind of know that or to control that. So a few evenings ago, Koshavidya gave a talk, and she used this image of the acorn and the oak tree. So it's a little bit like that. So an acorn has no idea that it can become an oak tree. An acorn probably thinks that, I'm going to do these practices and I'm going to become a bigger acorn. But actually, what the acorn doesn't know, that when it embarks upon these practices, is that it can grow into a full-size oak tree. And that can be quite frightening, actually. It can be quite scary, the idea of the extent to which we can grow if we really let the Dharma, and if we really let ourselves be watered by the practices, but be watered by the teachings of the Buddha. So it's an act of faith, and it's an act of courage, and it's a journey of discovery, and we discover through living, we discover through practice, and we also discover through connections with other people. So I think it can be really hard to really fully know ourselves and really know our shape. Other people are often much better at seeing this than we are ourselves. So particularly what we want to do is we want to be in a community where we can lovingly reflect each other back, not because we think, actually this trait in this person is really annoying to me and I want them to not have it, I want them to change, but because we want each other to grow, we want to help each other to grow, so that we can kind of, we all have blind spots, and we might see something in each other that they don't see. And certainly that's been my path, I've been living in a Buddhist community for 8 years, and a big part of the training for ordination process is kind of allowing yourself to be seen and allowing yourself to be kind of reflected back. And and sometimes you get reflected back and you think, okay, actually that doesn't quite resonate, and we all have our own biases, so it's not going to be perfect. But if it's kind of within a community by enough people, we can get quite a good sense actually of the shape that we are. And that can be quite humbling sometimes, actually. It's not always so comfortable when we get reflected back in maybe ways that we don't like so much. Thank you, I'm Olivia. Please let me know if I'm speaking too quietly, so I'll try and speak up so you can all hear me. So learning what shape we are, learning what plant we are, it can be humbling, can be painful, but also a bit of a relief. I come from a family where, academic study career was quite highly valued. And my way of kind of rebelling was by kind of not studying the things that was going to get me onto like a high paying career, but the things that I was actually interested in. I spent quite a lot, probably most of my 20s studying, and I actually realized that I didn't like it that much, and I wasn't that into academia. And and I retrained. So I initially studied one thing, and then I decided to retrain in psychology. And it was like, because I'd rebelled against kind of what my parents had kind of wanted me to do, I still needed to I felt I needed to get to the top in that field. So I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do psychology, I have to do a PhD, I have to do a doctorate. And I was preparing. I spent quite a long time, quite stressful, preparing for these interviews. And I went through 2 rounds of interviews, and I didn't get a place. And people at my work were very supportive, and they were like, they wrote me very good references, and they were like, but how have you not got a place? And actually what kept happening at these interviews was, so part of doing clinical psychology is working with people, is therapy. That's the part I was really interested in. And part of it is research. And I kept going into these interviews and kind of just trying to squeeze myself into some idea of what I thought I should say, because I actually wasn't that interested in research. And I think they could kind of tell. I was kind of blagging it a little bit. And it was kind of a relief to realize, it's not actually what I want to do. I don't want to do any more study. I've already studied for loads more than I wanted to do. And I'm actually not that into research. And actually, I just really want to do therapy. So it was kind of a relief to realize that. And also quite humbling, because I'd spent all this time and all this resource, and I'd done a master's and all these things, kind of trying to kind of get myself onto what I thought was, some idea that I had of kind of what shape I needed to be. So we can set up the right kinds of conditions for ourselves, but we don't know how we're going to unfold. And and we have, so it's a little bit like there's some kind of structure, some kind of patterning within us that will be different, and then it's like the same Dharma sort of shines through that. And we can sort of imagine it a little bit like lamp shades of different colors and different patterns and different sizes. So when the light shines through the lampshade, each lampshade lights up, and there's light, but how it lights up is slightly different. So that's another image that we can use for kind of how this works. And we have to kind of, what we can do is we can put ourselves in good conditions. We can put ourselves in the reign of the Dharma and Dharmic inspiration, and then we kind of have to surrender the rest. We, like a gardener, we plant the seeds, and we try and sort of put ourselves in the light. We try and put ourselves in the rain, and then the rest will kind of shine through us. So the colors and the patterns and the shapes, that's the part that we have to kind of accept and actually come to love. Yeah. And not try and be something different to what we are. So I want to relate quite a significant moment of growth in my life, and particularly this element of kind of the mysterious element of unfolding. So a few years ago, I was also, it's going to sound like I cook loads on retreat. I actually don't, but I was cooking on an intensive meditation retreat. It's like a 2-week silent camping retreat. And I had this idea of how that was going to be. And it was very romanticized in my head, like kind of cooking outside for people. And then like this kind of lots of silence, lots of meditation. I was going to go really deep in my meditation, and I was going to be kind of all immersed in nature. On this particular retreat, there were several cooks, and we kind of took it in turns to cook. And kind of from day one, I don't know if you have this experience, I just felt like one of the cooks just didn't like me. And I really don't like that because I really want to be liked. So, so I could just feel from day one, one of the cooks just didn't like me. And then, that kind of went on, and I was like, it was kind of bothering me a little bit. And then there was one day where I moved a pot that I didn't know she was using, but I didn't know she was using. I moved it in the kitchen, and she kind of stormed out and got very, and I just, I felt kind of baffled. I didn't know kind of what had happened. And she didn't really want to talk to me about it. So I felt kind of powerless. I felt out of control. So not only did I kind of feel like, oh, someone doesn't like me, and then I also felt like, but it's not fair. She hasn't got any good reason to. And then she was kind of telling the rest of the team how I was undermining her. And so I had very little control over this situation. And it was really pushing all of my worst buttons, like all of my kind of, not fair, I don't have control, I can't resolve this straight away. So I was really having to, and it was a silent retreat, so I really had to just sit with all of this stuff. And it was really distracting me, and then I got really angry because I was like, well, this is not what I've come here for. I'm really distracted now in meditation, and I want to have really still meditations. And this went on for a couple of days. And then we had, there was a ritual one evening, and it was a ritual to Padmasambhava. So those of you who were here the first 5 days, you would have experienced a Padmasambhava ritual. I don't quite know what happened. I was just I was really giving myself to this ritual and really giving myself to the mantra. And then this kind of thought, or kind of almost this voice popped into my head of just like, you could just love her. And I looked at her, and then I just did. I just loved her. I just felt like a really strong kind of heart opening to her. And then it was like everything, all of the colors just felt much more vivid. And the next day I was going for a walk, and it was just like, it was like everything had kind of opened up around me. And I experienced much more aliveness. And it just hadn't really been, none of it had kind of been a problem in a way. And I could kind of see how, we're just quite different shapes, and sure, she would have projected something onto me. Most of the time, actually, when we have a strong aversion response to other people, we are projecting something onto them. I do that too. But, it was a little bit like in the kitchen. A friend of mine who was on the retreat gave me this image, which I thought was really helpful, but she was this kind of slow camper van, and I was kind of in this red sports car zipping around, and we kind of, so that's sort of just what happens in life, right? We're different shapes, and we rub up against each other, and that's it. That's not her, it's not my fault. I hadn't done anything wrong. She was upset, but kind of how I was reacting to it in my mind was what was causing me the suffering. I could really see that. So I could sort of really see the metta as a bit of a superpower. And it really stuck with me, and it really changed kind of how I related to those kinds of situations in the future. And it didn't come from the idea that I had of my retreat. It didn't come from what I thought I was going to get out of it. This, the bigger acorn, I thought I was going to be a bigger acorn, but it didn't come from that. It kind of, what I did was I immersed myself in good conditions. I was meditating every day. I really gave myself to the mantra. I gave myself to the puja. And then it came at me sideways. And that retreat grew me in ways that I just couldn't have anticipated. And it was painful. And often the things that grow us are actually difficulty. But it was the way that I needed to grow. It was the way that I needed. It was what I thought. So we can kind of trust that if we put ourselves in good conditions, growth will happen. It won't be in the way that we expect or anticipate, but it will be in the way that we need. Yeah. 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 So I've been talking about the final kind of image that I want to talk about is what does it actually mean? What? So this rain of the Dharma, and the rain cloud will give the same amount of moisture, the same amount of rain to each and every plant. It doesn't discriminate. So, and it's sort of same with the Buddha. The Buddha would teach his Dharma to all that wanted to hear it. He wouldn't discriminate. And like I've been saying, so the plants may absorb it slightly differently. So some plants might be kind of more like ferns and just more and more and more and more. And some are like kind of cactuses. I'll take a little, then I'll go away and reflect for a long time. Or, but the teaching, the rain is kind of the same, and it might have different forms. So there's many different teachings in Buddhism, and we have many different ways in. So maybe for some people it's more study or meditation or ritual. And there's also many different schools of Buddhism. And sort of all of these kind of individual droplets, we can think of them as the different teachings and kind of different schools. But they all, this is really important, they all have the same meaning. And whatever aspect of the Buddhist teaching that you practice, it has one essence and one purpose, and that is to help you to free you from your conditioning. So, we know it's the Dharma because it has a taste of freedom. So just like the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, the Dharma has one taste, the taste of freedom. So that's kind of how we know if it's Dharma or not. Is it actually helping us to free us from our conditioning? Because we can also end up doing things that kind of enforce our conditioning, can't we? Sometimes in sort of self-improvement stuff. So the rain, it rains equally on all of us, and we don't have to be good to receive the rain. We don't have to deserve the rain. It just rains. But we do need to be receptive to the rain. And I think oftentimes, Maitri Bandhu gave me this image today, actually, which I really liked. I think oftentimes we can be a little bit like plants, really, really wanting the rain, but we're holding up umbrellas. So we're kind of blocking it from coming in. Sometimes we don't like to think that we need help. We like to think that we know. We like to think that we know ourselves. We know things. I speak for myself as well. We have ideas. We have ideas that feel more comfortable to us rather than kind of opening up to something new. So I think it's being receptive to the rain means being willing to try out the teachings, being willing to actually, so we're here on retreat, and in a way, so if we think of all of you as plants, you've all already put yourself in really good conditions by just being here. These are good conditions. These are tried and tested conditions. Be it living in community with one another, hearing Dharma talks, meditating, reflecting, studying, and kind of what would it mean to really let that in, to really let it touch you, to show up to things, And the other thing I wanted to say about this is because it's one Dharma, it's one rain. We don't need to go anywhere else searching for lots of different kinds of rains. We might think, actually, I prefer slightly warmer rain, or, I prefer like a really intense rain, a bit like this kind of monsoon kind of bucket down rain. We might kind of think, And so I think it doesn't have to be Triratna, but once we find the Dharma, I think it's important to commit to it, and really let the rain permeate us, really soak in it, really let it in. Because if we kind of go around and getting little sprinkles from here and there, it's not really going to go very deep. Yeah. And kind of continuing this image of allowing it to permeate. In order to transform, it's important not just to kind of read about Buddhism. It's very easy to do that, isn't it? And especially kind of in the silence, we feel a little bit restless. Let's just read about Buddhism. We have to really feel it. And we have to check in with ourselves. Does this actually fit? Am I freeing myself from my conditioning? Does this feel freeing? Am I doing what is habitual? Am I doing kind of what feels a bit creative, what feels non-habitual? And I think we can actually feel this in our bodies. I think when we're doing the habitual thing, like, on that retreat when I was kind of going over all the ways that this woman was behaving unfairly towards me, there's a constriction that happens in my body. And then when I look at it from a different point of view, there's an opening that happens. I think we can feel that. And my working ground on this retreat, so being in the kitchen, so it's very good. It's a very good place for noticing one's habits, figuring around work. I can get into efficiency. That's my thing. I love efficiency. But I can kind of feel, so there's a certain level of that's needed, right? And I can kind of feel like when it's creative, and then I can feel like when it's just slightly compulsive, when I'm just doing that in meditation because I don't want to be with my experience, or because I'm slightly anxious about how it's going to go and I want to try and have more control than it's possible to have. So I think we have to just keep on checking in with ourselves, like, are we actually living out the teachings? And it might be, for a different person, it might be the opposite. It might be, the same task, like someone else in the kitchen team might have. Maybe that would be really creative for them to think about efficiency, but they're working on something else. So we have to just be really honest with ourselves in this area. And unfortunately, it's often the things that we want to avoid that we need to address and kind of tackle, and the things that we feel a bit of compulsive around, the things we want to control, like over plan. Those are the things we need to step back from. So it's almost like our nature is kind of like the things we need to step back from. We want to step towards, so we have to step back from them. So I'll just end with. I think what really matters here in the whole, and we think about all the images in the White Lotus Sutra, and particularly in this image, is to really feel through the teachings, to feel through the symbols, the images, the concepts. And what we're trying to feel for is some little glimpse or some degree of the kind of enlightened consciousness from which all the teachings originally came from. So this sense of freedom, this sense of kind of relief upon hearing the Dharma, this kind of sense of growth. What does it feel like to just let things unfold? We're like nourishing ourselves, we're creating good conditions, but we're sort of also surrendering and letting things unfold. And that we take the risk, actually, to allow the rain of the Dharma in, let us soak us, move us, change us, grow us, so that we sprout and shoot in more ways than we can possibly imagine. And I'll end with a short poem called Risk by Anais Nin. And then the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom.